The sun was setting over the Georgia interstate when Marine Sergeant Wilson pulled into the busy rest stop. His muscles were aching from the long drive, and the thought of stretching his legs made him sigh with relief. The familiar smell of coffee and fast food wafted through the air as families and truckers moved about, taking breaks from their journeys. 20 years in the Marines had taught Wilson to stay alert, even during the most mundane moments. Maybe it was this ingrained habit that drew his attention to the picnic area where something felt off. At first glance, it looked like any other father-daughter pair taking a break from traveling. A middle-aged white man and a young black girl, probably around 12, sitting at one of the wooden tables. But there was something about the girl's posture that didn't sit right with him. While she appeared calm on the surface, her shoulders were tense, and her eyes kept darting around the rest stop. The man with her was tapping his fingers on the table, his jaw clenched tight as he leaned forward, speaking to her in low, urgent tones. Wilson walked over to the vending machines, positioning himself where he could keep an eye on the situation without drawing attention. He'd seen enough in his career to know that appearances could be deceiving, and something about this scene was raising red flags in his mind. The girl's hands caught his attention next. While she nodded at whatever the man was saying, her right hand was making a subtle, repeated motion, opening and closing her palm while crossing her fingers. To most people, it might have looked like nervous fidgeting, but Wilson's heart rate picked up as he recognized the gesture. Just last week, his teenage daughter had shown him a viral social media post about a universal distress signal designed for people who needed help but couldn't speak freely. He watched as the man checked his phone, his movements becoming more agitated. The girl's hand signal became slightly more pronounced, and now Wilson could see the fear in her eyes as she glanced around, hoping someone would understand her silent plea for help. Wilson knew he had to act, but his military training kicked in, reminding him that rushing in could make things worse. If his instincts were right, this girl was in danger, but any sudden moves might cause the man to panic. He needed to be smart about this. Walking casually toward the rest stop building, Wilson noticed a young employee restocking the coffee station. The teenage worker looked up as Wilson approached, probably expecting a complaint about empty cream containers or cold coffee. Instead, Wilson leaned in close, keeping his voice low and calm. "I need you to listen carefully," he said, maintaining a friendly expression while his eyes stayed fixed on the picnic area. "There's a situation outside that requires police attention. Can you get your supervisor to make that call without drawing attention?" The employee's eyes widened, but to their credit, they kept their composure. With a slight nod, they moved toward the staff area, their pace deliberately casual. Wilson silently thanked his luck. The kid had good instincts. Back outside, the situation was escalating. The man had stood up, gesturing for the girl to do the same. Wilson could see the panic rising in her eyes as she slowly gathered her things, every movement deliberately drawn out. She was buying time, and Wilson prayed she could hold on just a little longer. He watched as she dropped her backpack, spilling its contents. The man's face darkened as she apologetically began picking up scattered pencils and papers, each movement painfully slow. Wilson's hand tightened around his coffee cup as he noticed a tear sliding down her cheek. Time seemed to stretch like molasses as they waited for help to arrive. Wilson positioned himself between the pair and their parked car, pretending to be absorbed in his phone while keeping them in his peripheral vision. His heart was pounding, but his face remained neutral, years of combat experience coming in handy at this roadside rest stop in Georgia. The girl's eyes met his for a brief moment, and he gave her the smallest of nods. A flicker of hope crossed her face as she continued her careful stalling tactics, dropping items again as the man's frustration grew more visible. In the distance, Wilson heard what he'd been waiting for, the distinctive sound of sirens approaching. The man's head snapped up at the sound, and Wilson saw the moment panic replaced his anger. The next few minutes would be crucial, and Wilson silently prepared himself to act if needed. The girl's hands were still making that subtle signal, a desperate plea for help that had set this whole scene in motion. As the sirens grew closer, Wilson said a quiet prayer of thanks for social media, for a young girl's courage, and for the instincts that had made him pay attention on what could have been just another ordinary evening at a highway rest stop. The rest stop's fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the parking lot as the evening grew darker. Wilson couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching something important unfold. His mind wandered to his own daughter, safely at home with her mom, probably working on her science project or chatting with friends online. The thought made his chest tighten as he watched the young girl at the picnic table, still carefully making that subtle hand signal. He remembered the day his daughter had shown him the video about distress signals. He'd been half listening at first, scrolling through his phone while she excitedly explained how this new hand signal was helping people worldwide. "Dad, this is important," she'd insisted, demonstrating the motion, palm out, thumb tucked in, fingers closing to trap the thumb. She'd make him practice until he got it right, and now he was thanking heaven for that lesson. The girl at the picnic table was doing a remarkable job staying calm. Despite her fear, she kept her movements controlled and deliberate. Her hand signals were supple enough that most people wouldn't notice, but clear enough for someone who knew what to look for. She'd obviously practiced this, probably having seen the same videos that had taught his daughter. Wilson observed how she'd positioned herself at the table. She was sitting on the edge of the bench, maintaining a slight distance from the man. Every few minutes, she'd shift slightly, creating more space between them while making it look natural. Smart kid, Wilson thought. She was doing everything right. The man's behavior was becoming more concerning by the minute. His attempts to appear casual were failing as anxiety crept into his movements. He kept checking his phone, his leg bouncing underneath the table. Occasionally, he'd scan the parking lot, his eyes darting from car to car. Each time he did this, the girl would make her distress signal a little more pronounced, taking advantage of his divided attention. A family with 2 small children walked past their table, the kids laughing about something. The girl's eyes followed them, and Wilson noticed her hand signal become slightly more urgent. She was hoping they would notice, but they were too absorbed in their own world, the parents busy keeping their excited children from running off. Wilson watched as the girl reached for her water bottle with her free hand. The trembling in her fingers was barely noticeable as she took a sip, but it spoke volumes about the fear she was fighting to control. Yet she kept her composure, maintained her signal, and stayed aware of her surroundings. Her courage was remarkable. The sun had almost completely set now, and the rest stop's outdoor lights were flickering to life. Wilson could see the growing desperation in the man's face as more vehicles pulled into the parking lot. The evening rush was beginning, with more travelers stopping for breaks and dinner. Each new arrival made the man more agitated, his fingers drumming faster on the table surface. A truck driver walked past, his keys jingling. The girl's eyes darted toward the sound, hope flashing across her face before disappearing when the driver passed by without noticing. Wilson saw her swallow hard, but she didn't give up. Her hand kept moving, that same careful pattern, palm open, fingers closing, a silent cry for help that most people didn't even know existed. Wilson thought about all the social media posts his daughter shared with him, the ones he sometimes dismissed as teenage stuff. How many other signals and signs had he missed because he hadn't paid attention? This young girl's life might change tonight because someone had thought to share a video about hand signals and because she'd been brave enough to use it. The rest stop was getting busier now. A group of college students spilled out of a minivan, laughing and stretching. 2 elderly couples walked their small dogs in the grass area. A mom tried to corral her tired kids back to their car. Normal evening activities at a highway rest stop, while right in the middle of it all, a silent drama was unfolding. Through it all, the girl maintained her composure. Even as the man's agitation grew, even as the minutes ticked by with no one else noticing her signal, she kept going. Her determination was visible in the set of her shoulders, in the careful way she kept making the signal despite her obvious exhaustion. Wilson could hear sirens in the distance now, growing closer. He watched as the girl's eyes widened slightly at the sound, but she didn't stop her signal. If anything, she became more deliberate with it, as if knowing help was finally on the way gave her renewed strength. Her resilience was extraordinary. She'd managed to stay calm and alert through what must have been a terrifying ordeal, trusting that someone would eventually understand her silent plea for help. As the sirens grew louder, Wilson silently commended this brave young girl. In an age where kids were often criticized for spending too much time on social media, here was proof that sometimes those viral videos could save lives. This girl had armed herself with knowledge and used it exactly when she needed it most. Her story would likely become another video, Another post shared across platforms, possibly helping the next person in danger. The flashing lights were visible now, reflecting off the windows of the rest stop building. Wilson watched as the girl's hand finally stilled, her shoulders straightening just slightly. Help was coming, and her signal had worked exactly as intended. In the growing darkness of a Georgia evening, at a simple highway rest stop, a young girl's courage and a viral social media trend had come together to change the course of what could have been a very different story. The sound of approaching sirens changed everything in an instant. Wilson watched as the man's face transformed from irritation to panic, his eyes darting between the rest stop exits. The girl's hand signal finally stopped, but she kept her movements slow and deliberate, like someone trying not to startle a dangerous animal. Time seemed to slow down as Wilson considered his options. 20 years of Marine training had taught him that the most dangerous moment often comes right before help arrives. He could see the man's right hand twitching toward his jacket pocket, and Wilson's stomach tightened. He couldn't risk the man having a weapon, not with so many families around. The evening crowd at the rest stop continued their normal activities, unaware of the tension building at the picnic table. A mom was changing her baby's diaper at a nearby bench. An elderly couple walked their tiny dog past the scene, the little animal's collar jingling cheerfully. The everyday sounds of car doors slamming and children laughing created a surreal backdrop to the crisis unfolding. Wilson moved closer to the rest stop building, positioning himself where he could block the shortest path to the parking lot. He pulled out his phone, pretending to take a call while keeping the pair in his peripheral vision. The girl was still buying time, now slowly packing her backpack with shaking hands. "Just leave it," the man hissed, loud enough for Wilson to hear. The girl jumped slightly but continued her careful movements. She dropped a pen, then bent to pick it up with agonizing slowness. Wilson silently praised her quick thinking. Every second she delayed could make a difference. The rest stop employee who'd called the police was now standing by the door, trying to look casual while keeping an eye on the situation. Wilson caught their eye and gave a subtle nod. The kid had done good. They'd managed to alert the authorities without drawing attention to themselves. The first police car pulled into the rest stop, its lights flashing but siren now silent. The officer parked casually, as if just taking a break. Wilson could see more lights approaching in the distance. His military training kicked in as he assessed the scene. 2 main exits, about 30 civilians in the immediate area, and an increasingly unstable suspect. The man stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the concrete. "We're leaving." Now, his voice was tight with barely controlled panic. The girl clutched her backpack to her chest like a shield, her feet dragging as she stood. Wilson tensed, ready to move if needed. A second police car pulled in from the opposite direction, effectively blocking the main exit. The man's face went ash-white as he realized what was happening. His hand moved toward his pocket again, and Wilson made his decision. He couldn't wait any longer. "Evening, folks," Wilson said loudly, walking toward them with deliberate casualness. "Got some pretty nasty weather heading this way." He positioned himself between the man and the girl, still maintaining a conversational tone. "They're saying it might hit in the next hour or so." The man's hand froze. Wilson could see the calculation in his eyes. Too many witnesses now, too much attention. The girl took advantage of the distraction, taking one small step backward, then another. Her eyes were fixed on the approaching officers, who were now walking toward them with measured steps. "Sir, I'm going to need you to keep your hands where we can see them," the first officer called out, her voice firm but calm. The second officer was already moving to flank the man, cutting off his escape routes. Wilson stayed where he was, providing a human barrier between the suspect and the young girl. The man's shoulders slumped as he realized he was trapped. His hand moved away from his pocket, and Wilson heard the girl let out a tiny sob of relief. More police cars were arriving now, their lights painting the rest stop in rotating blue and red. The evening crowd had finally noticed something was wrong, parents hurrying their children to their cars, travelers watching from a safe distance. The girl was trembling now, the brave facade finally cracking as she realized she was safe. Wilson wanted to comfort her, but knew better than to approach. She'd been through enough trauma without a stranger coming near her, even one who'd helped. Instead, he spoke softly. "You did real good, kid. Real good. Help's here now." The officers moved in smoothly, their movements practiced and professional. One gently led the girl away, while two others handled the suspect. Wilson watched as a female officer wrapped a blanket around the girl's shoulders, speaking to her in soft tones. The child was crying now, but these were tears of relief. More law enforcement vehicles were arriving, state troopers, local police, even an ambulance. Wilson gave his statement to one of the officers, explaining how he'd noticed the hand signal and what had made him suspicious. The officer nodded approvingly, noting how Wilson's careful approach had helped avoid escalating the situation. As the scene unfolded, Wilson thought about how many things had gone right in the past hour. A young girl had remembered a safety signal she'd learned from social media. A Marine had noticed and recognized it. A rest stop employee had called for help without causing a scene. Law enforcement had arrived quickly and handled the situation professionally. It was a chain of small actions that had come together to prevent what could have been a tragedy. The rest stop was quieter now, most travelers having moved on once they realized something serious was happening. The evening air had grown cooler, and the lights from the emergency vehicles created long shadows across the parking lot. Wilson watched as the girl was led to the ambulance for a checkup, her steps lighter now, her shoulders straighter. In the distance, thunder rumbled. The weather warning hadn't been a complete lie. Wilson hoped the approaching storm would wash away some of the fear and tension of this evening. As he walked back to his car, he pulled out his phone to call his daughter. He needed to tell her how right she'd been about those social media safety videos and how proud he was that she'd made him learn them too. The rest stop had transformed into a hub of law enforcement activity. Red and blue lights bounced off the windows of the building, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere in the growing darkness. The regular evening traffic had been redirected to the truck parking area, leaving the main lot clear for emergency vehicles. Inside one of the police cars, the man sat with his head bowed, all his previous aggression replaced by defeated silence. Two officers stood nearby, speaking in low voices as they coordinated with dispatch. Their faces were grim as more details of the situation emerged through radio calls and computer checks. The girl was sitting in the back of the ambulance now, a female paramedic checking her vital signs, while a kind-faced police officer sat nearby, taking notes. The blanket was still wrapped around her shoulders, and someone had given her a cup of hot chocolate from the rest stop's vending machine. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but her eyes kept darting to where the man was being held, as if making sure he couldn't get away. Wilson stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold while giving his statement to a state trooper. "I noticed the signal around 6:45, he explained, checking his watch. "It looked just like the one my daughter showed me from that viral video. The way the girl kept doing it, so careful and deliberate, I knew it had to be intentional." The trooper nodded, typing notes into her tablet. "Good thing you recognized it," she said. "We're seeing more cases where these social media safety signals actually make a difference. Last month, we had a domestic situation where a teenager used the same signal at a grocery store." More police vehicles were arriving now, including an unmarked car with two detectives. They headed straight for the ambulance, their movements purposeful but gentle as they approached the girl. Wilson watched as they introduced themselves, noting how they kept their distance and spoke softly, mindful of what she'd been through. The rest stop employees had been gathered near the building's entrance, giving their statements to another officer. The young worker who'd called the police looked both shaken and proud. Their manager had an arm around their shoulders, praising them for staying calm and following protocol. "You did exactly what you should have done," the manager was saying. "You probably helped save that girl's life." Thunder rumbled overhead, and a few drops of rain began to fall. The officers moved quickly to get the girl inside the rest stop building before the storm hit. As they walked past Wilson, he heard her telling the detective about her school, her voice stronger now. "I was waiting for the bus," she said. "He said there was an emergency at home, that my mom had sent him." Wilson's jaw clenched as he listened. He thought about his own daughter again, about all the kids who waited at bus stops every morning, trusting that the world around them was safe. The rain was falling harder now, but he barely noticed it. His military training had prepared him for a lot of things, but hearing a child describe something like this never got easier. Inside the rest stop, things were quieter. The regular evening crowd had thinned out, leaving only law enforcement, the staff, and a few curious truckers who were keeping their distance. The girl sat at a table in the corner, still talking to the detectives. She was more animated now, describing how she'd learned the hand signal. "I saw it on TikTok," she was saying. "Lots of people were sharing it, showing how to do it properly. My friends and I practiced it at lunch sometimes, just in case." Her voice trailed off, and she took another sip of hot chocolate. The female detective nodded encouragingly, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. Through the windows, Wilson could see more vehicles pulling into the parking lot, these ones without emergency lights. Local news vans, their reporters already preparing for live broadcasts despite the rain. An officer went out to establish a perimeter, keeping them at a safe distance. This would be all over the news by morning, another reminder of why these safety signals were so important. The rain was coming down in sheets now, drumming on the rest stop's roof. The man was being transferred to a larger police vehicle, his head covered as officers led him through the downpour. He looked smaller somehow, less threatening than he had at the picnic table. The girl watched through the window, and Wilson saw her straighten her shoulders, as if finally believing that the danger had truly passed. More calls were being made now. Wilson could hear fragments of conversations, officers coordinating with other jurisdictions, checking missing persons reports, contacting the girl's family. The detective's face lit up as she received confirmation on her radio, and she turned to the girl with a smile. "Your parents are on their way," she said softly. "They'll be here soon." The news seemed to release the last of the tension from the girl's body. She slumped slightly in her chair, exhaustion finally overtaking her. The paramedic moved closer, checking her blood pressure again, speaking to her in gentle tones. Through it all, the girl maintained a remarkable composure, answering questions clearly, helping the officers understand exactly what had happened. Outside, the storm was in full force, but inside the rest stop, a different kind of storm was passing. Wilson watched as the girl began to show signs of her true age again, fidgeting with her cup, asking if she could text her best friend, wondering if she'd missed too much homework. These normal, everyday concerns seemed to ground her, bringing her back to the regular rhythms of life. As Wilson prepared to leave, giving the officers his contact information for any follow-up questions, he noticed the girl had pulled out her phone. She was showing the detectives the exact video where she'd learned the signal, her voice growing stronger as she explained how it worked. Even after everything she'd been through, she was making sure the officers had all the information they needed to help other kids who might use the same signal. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent in the air. Inside the rest stop's small conference room, detectives were piecing together the full story. The girl's parents were on their way, driving through the rain-slicked roads as fast as safely possible. Every few minutes, someone would check their progress on the phone, updating the girl who sat wrapped in her blanket, finally showing signs of tiredness after her ordeal. The investigation was revealing a disturbing pattern. The man had been watching the school bus stop for days, learning the routines of different children. He'd chosen his moment carefully, approaching when the girl was momentarily alone. His story about a family emergency had been carefully crafted, using details he'd gathered from social media and casual conversations overhead at local shops. "You did everything right," the female detective told the girl, her voice gentle but firm. "You kept your head clear, you remembered your safety training, and you never gave up trying to signal for help." She placed a comforting hand on the table, close enough to show support, but not so close as to make the girl uncomfortable. "Can you tell us more about how you learned that signal?" The girl sat up straighter, some energy returning to her voice. "My teacher showed us videos about safety in our life skills class," she explained. "We learned about different ways to ask for help if we couldn't talk. The hand signal was the newest one." She demonstrated it again, the movement now familiar to everyone in the room. "We practiced it in class, and then I showed my little brother too." Outside the conference room, Wilson was finishing up his final statement. He'd stayed longer than necessary, wanting to make sure everything was properly documented. The young rest stop worker who'd called the police was leaving now, their shift long over. They looked exhausted but proud, knowing they'd played a crucial role in the night's events. More details were emerging as different law enforcement agencies shared information. The man had been moving between states, never staying in one place long enough to draw attention. He used different stories, different personas, but always targeted bus stops and places where children might be briefly alone. The girl's quick thinking and courage had finally brought his activities to an end. The rest stop had returned to its normal evening routine, though there was a lingering sense of what had happened. Travelers came and went, many of them glancing curiously at the remaining police cars. Some had seen the news vans earlier and were checking their phones, reading the first breaking news reports that were starting to appear online. Inside, the girl was showing the detectives her phone, scrolling through her social media feeds to find the original safety signal video. It was everywhere for a while, she explained. People were sharing it like crazy. Some kids thought it was just another trend, but our teacher said it could save our lives someday. She paused, the reality of those words hitting her anew. The detective nodded encouragingly. And she was right. You know, since that signal started spreading online, we've had several cases where it helped people escape dangerous situations. Your story is going to inspire more people to learn it. A gentle knock on the door interrupted them. A state trooper poked his head in, speaking softly to the detective. The girl perked up immediately, recognizing what this might mean. The detective smiled warmly. Your parents are 5 minutes away, she confirmed. The news energized the girl. She sat up straighter, trying to smooth her hair with trembling hands. Someone had brought her a small mirror and some tissues, and she dabbed at her face, trying to look more like her usual self. These simple, normal actions seemed to help ground her after the trauma of the past few days. Wilson watched from his position near the vending machines as a car pulled into the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across the windows. 2 people jumped out before it had fully stopped, the girl's parents, their faces etched with worry and hope. The female detective met them at the door, quickly explaining the situation before leading them to the conference room. The reunion was both heartbreaking and heartwarming. The girl's mother burst into tears at the sight of her daughter, while her father seemed frozen in place for a moment before they both rushed forward. The girl practically leaped into their arms, her composure finally breaking as she sobbed into her mother's shoulder. Through the window, Wilson could see the family holding each other tight, their words inaudible but their relief palpable. The detectives stepped back, giving them space for their private moment. Even the most seasoned officers were blinking back tears at the scene. The rest stop staff had brought in fresh coffee and snacks, setting them quietly on a side table. They moved efficiently but respectfully, understanding the significance of what was happening in their usually ordinary workplace. The night shift manager had called in extra help, ensuring everything ran smoothly despite the unusual circumstances. As the initial emotion of the reunion settled, the detectives gently began explaining everything to the parents. The girl sat between them, holding both their hands as the full story emerged. Her mother's face showed horror at what might have happened, while her father's jaw clenched with barely controlled anger. But mostly, they just kept looking at their daughter with profound gratitude and pride. The girl's father suddenly stood up and walked to where Wilson was standing. Without a word, he pulled the Marine into a tight hug. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for paying attention. Thank you for saving my baby girl." Wilson returned the hug, his military composure briefly cracking as he thought of his own daughter at home. Throughout the rest stop, people were starting to share the story on their phones. The hand signal was being demonstrated and practiced at tables and in parked cars. Parents were showing it to their children, truck drivers were sending links to their colleagues. A simple gesture that had started as a viral trend had proved its worth once again, and its importance was spreading in real time through the very social media channels that had first introduced it. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. News of what happened at the rest stop spread quickly, touching hearts and raising awareness across the country. The girl's story became a powerful reminder of how a simple hand signal, learned from social media, could make the difference between danger and safety. At the local police station, the girl's parents sat in comfortable chairs, listening as detectives explained everything they'd discovered. Their daughter was in the next room with a child counselor, drawing pictures and talking about her experience in a safe, supportive environment. Every few minutes, her mother would glance toward the door, as if making sure her child was still there, still safe. "She's an incredible young lady," the lead detective said, sharing details of how the girl had managed to stay calm and alert throughout her ordeal. Her ability to remember and use that safety signal to keep her composure even when she was scared, it's remarkable. He spread out some papers on his desk, showing how her actions had helped them connect several other cases across state lines. The girl's father, a local youth pastor, wiped tears from his eyes as he listened. "We always taught her to be strong," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But we never imagined she'd need to be this strong." His wife squeezed his hand, both of them still processing the close call their family had experienced. Meanwhile, at the rest stop where it all happened, things had returned to normal, almost. The staff had put up a small bulletin board near the entrance, displaying information about various safety signals and what to do if you spot someone in distress. Travelers stopped to take pictures, sharing them on social media and spreading the knowledge further. The young employee who'd called the police had become something of a local hero. Other rest stops in the area were using their quick thinking as an example in staff training sessions. "Don't try to handle it yourself," they explained to their coworkers. "Stay calm, alert the authorities discreetly, and keep an eye on the situation from a safe distance." Wilson, the Marine who'd first noticed the signal, had returned to his own family. His daughter ran to hug him as he walked through the door, and he held her tighter and longer than usual. That evening, they sat together at the kitchen table, watching as their local news covered the story. His daughter beamed with pride when they mentioned how her father had recognized the hand signal she'd taught him. "See, Dad," she said, nudging him playfully. "I told you all those TikTok videos weren't just silly dances." Wilson smiled, remembering how he'd initially dismissed many of her social media interests. Now he found himself regularly asking her to show him the latest safety trends and signals. Back at their home, the girl and her family were slowly finding their way back to normal routines. Her mother had taken time off work to be with her, and their living room had become a cozy nest of blankets, favorite snacks, and comfort movies. Friends and neighbors stopped by with meals and hugs, showing support in quiet, meaningful ways. The girl's little brother had become her fierce protector, insisting on walking her to and from the bus stop each day. He'd memorized the hand signal himself and had been teaching it to his friends at school. Their parents watched this with mixed emotions, pride in their children's resilience, sadness that such knowledge was necessary, and profound gratitude that their family was still whole. One afternoon, the girl received a special visitor, the female detective who'd been so gentle with her during the investigation. She brought news that their case had prompted several school districts to start incorporating safety signal training into their curriculum. The girl's face lit up at this information. "So other kids will learn it too?" she asked. "They'll know what to do if they need help." The detective nodded, smiling warmly. "Your courage is helping protect other children," she explained. "Because you were brave enough to use that signal, and because people like Mr. Wilson were alert enough to notice it, more people are learning about these safety measures." The girl's story had reached far beyond their local community. Social media platforms were filled with parents and teachers sharing resources about safety signals and discussing how to talk to children about staying alert without making them fearful. The viral hand signal that had saved her was being practiced in homes and classrooms across the country. Her mother found her one evening, teaching the signal to her younger cousins during a video call. "Remember," she told them, her voice strong and clear, "it doesn't matter if you think no one will notice. Keep doing it until someone does. There are good people out there who are watching and ready to help." The local church where her father preached had become a hub for community safety awareness. Parents gathered there to learn about various safety signals and strategies for protecting their children. The girl sometimes sat in on these meetings, adding her own insights about what had helped her stay strong during her ordeal. "I kept thinking about my family," she told the group one evening. "About how my mom always says that being scared is okay, but giving up isn't an option. So I just kept making the signal, even when I thought nobody would understand what it meant." Her words touched everyone in the room, reminding them that courage often comes in small, persistent actions. As weeks passed, life began to feel more normal, though everything was touched by a new awareness. The girl returned to school, where her teachers and classmates welcomed her with gentle support. Her story had transformed her from a quiet student into someone whose strength inspired others, though she remained refreshingly humble about her role in raising awareness about safety signals. 6 months after that fateful evening at the rest stop, the impact of what happened continued to create positive changes across the country. On a bright spring morning, the girl stood in front of her school assembly, her voice clear and confident as she shared her story with hundreds of students and teachers. "I never thought I'd be the one who needed help," she told them, her parents watching proudly from the side of the stage. "But because someone took the time to teach me that hand signal, and because a kind stranger paid attention when I used it, I'm here today." The audience sat in complete silence, hanging on every word of her story. The school assembly was just one of many places where her experience had sparked important conversations about safety. Rest stops across the state had implemented new training programs for their staff, teaching them to recognize various distress signals and respond appropriately. The young employee who'd made that crucial phone call now helped conduct some of these training sessions. Wilson, the Marine who'd first noticed her signal, had been invited to speak at police departments and community centers. He always started his talks the same way, by crediting his daughter for making him learn the signal in the first place. "Sometimes the best safety lessons come from our kids," he'd say. "We just need to be willing to listen and learn." The girl's father had transformed his youth ministry to include regular discussions about personal safety. "We don't talk about these things to make you afraid," he would tell his young congregation. "We talk about them to make you strong." His daughter sometimes joined these sessions, showing younger kids how to make the signal and reminding them never to give up if they needed help. Social media platforms had taken notice too. The hand signal video that had saved the girl's life was now being promoted as part of official safety campaigns. Companies were working with child safety experts to develop better ways of sharing and teaching these signals to people of all ages. One morning, the girl received a special package in the mail. Inside was a letter from a police department in another state, thanking her for inspiring them to start a new safety awareness program in their local schools. They included a photo of hundreds of students practicing the hand signal during an assembly. The girl pinned the picture to her bulletin board, right next to her favorite family photos. Her mother had started a support group for parents, creating a safe space where they could share their fears and hopes while learning how to protect their children without making them fearful. "It's about empowerment," she would explain, "about giving our kids tools to stay safe while letting them know they're not alone." The rest stop where everything happened had become something of a landmark. Travelers would stop to take pictures of the safety information board, which now included multiple languages and clear illustrations. The staff had embraced their role as safety ambassadors, keeping watchful eyes on their surroundings while maintaining a welcoming atmosphere. Wilson's daughter had turned her social media accounts into platforms for sharing safety information. She posted regular updates about new signals and safety trends, always including her father in her videos. Their natural father-daughter dynamic helped make serious safety topics more approachable for other families. 1 year after the incident, the girl stood in front of a much larger audience, this time at a national safety conference. Law enforcement officers, teachers, and child safety experts had gathered to learn from her experience. She spoke with the same quiet strength that had helped her survive her ordeal. "Sometimes people ask me if I feel lucky," she told the crowd. "But luck didn't save me. Knowledge did. Awareness did. A stranger who cared enough to pay attention did." She demonstrated the hand signal one more time, her movements confident and clear. "These signals only work if we all learn them, if we all watch out for each other." The conference had brought together many of the people involved in her rescue. The Rest Stop employee, now a supervisor, shared how the experience had changed their approach to customer service. The detectives who'd worked her case presented new training materials based on what they'd learned. Wilson spoke about the importance of taking social media safety trends seriously. Back in her hometown, the girl's life had found a new normal. She still loved the same music, still laughed with her friends at lunch, still helped her little brother with his homework. But she carried herself with a quiet confidence, knowing that her story had helped make the world a little safer for other kids. Her school had started a safety awareness club, which she helped lead. They created posters, made videos, and organized workshops teaching various safety signals and strategies. The club's motto, suggested by the girl herself, was simple but powerful: pay attention, stay strong, help others. The last piece of the story came full circle when a new viral video started spreading online. It showed the girl and Wilson's daughter together, demonstrating different safety signals and explaining how to respond if you spot someone using them. Their natural friendship and genuine commitment to helping others made the video particularly compelling. Remember, the girl said in the video's closing moments, "It's okay to be scared. It's okay to need help. What matters is that you don't give up. Keep making the signal. Keep believing that someone will notice, because there are always good people out there watching and ready to help." As the video spread across social media platforms, gaining millions of views and shares, it carried a powerful message of hope and community. The simple hand signal that had saved one girl's life had grown into a movement, reminding people everywhere that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact.